All right, whenever you're ready, go ahead and start.
Path to Liberty by John Lanning, MD. The path to liberty is through the concept of individual rights. Liberty exists in a society where aggression is prohibited and individual rights are protected. The right to life is the basis of all rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson, from the Declaration of Independence. What is not self-evident is the definition of rights. A right is a sanction to freedom of action. A natural right is a universal truth and does not require permission. A natural right to life is an inalienable right, an eternal and universal truth. For a person of religion, that right is sanctified by your Creator, God. For others, it follows from the law of identity, first identified by Aristotle, which states that A is A, i.e., a thing is what it is. So man is what he is, requiring the right to life for his existence. Other important philosophers followed Aristotle. St. Thomas Aquinas brought philosophy back out of the Dark Ages. Descartes and Spinoza brought us reason to counter faith, which gave us the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason. The Industrial Revolution has evolved from this philosophy. The right to life is a moral concept and carries the foundations of a moral society, where every individual is sovereign. However, this sovereignty carries the responsibility that each citizen must respect the same sovereignty of others. Sovereignty of the individual and legitimate function of the state. Sovereignty is a philosophical concept denoting no higher power. This is the birthright of every individual universally and can never be taken away, though it can be violated. These rights may be violated by the initiation of force. Therefore, a government is instituted to protect our rights and is given the exclusive right in the form of laws granted by its citizens to use force, but only to retaliate, never to initiate force against its own citizens. This distinction between the initiation of force and retaliation of force is crucial. It is seldom appreciated to its fullest extent, resulting in confusion and misunderstanding with far-reaching and sometimes unintended and dangerous consequences. The retaliation of force is justifiable on the grounds of our right to life and property, thereby protecting our liberty. However, when government does initiate force, it is acting on the premise that the state is sovereign over its citizens. This has happened throughout history by every form of authoritarianism, resulting in tyranny, always. The moral premise and legitimate function of the state is that it must earn its sovereignty by protecting the rights of its citizens and only to the extent that it does so. Therefore, government must be subordinated to the same moral principles of its citizens and their individual rights. Property rights. The right to property is the right to the use and disposal of one's property. To implement man's life, he must be free to act, to acquire the values, the properties, including food, clothing, shelter, that he must have to sustain his life as required by his nature. Therefore, a code of values to sustain life is a moral code. Actions that destroy these values or have a negative impact is not moral. Property rights are based on natural law as in a right to life. These moral rights must be protected by a legitimate government. Freedom. The opportunity to support one's life by one's own effort is the very definition of freedom. Freedom is necessary to maximize the acquisition of property intrinsic to man's right to life. Man's right to life without property rights is a contradiction and is logically absurd. Therefore, an enlightened moral goal to the establishment of a well-regulated government is necessary with the sole purpose of enabling and ensuring the full potential of each of its citizens. This fulfills Jefferson's pursuit of happiness. Everyone deserves a fighting chance. U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren. Capitalism is the only economic system that recognizes individual rights and property rights, which fulfills the above goals of a free society. Nothing less than a dedication to these moral imperatives will suffice if we are to live up to the promise of our founding fathers: life, liberty, and freedom for all. However, our democratic and representative government has enacted laws violating these principles, having far-reaching and profound consequences. We can and must do better. Policies. Applying the principles of liberty and freedom as above, here are some proposed policies. The income tax, which is implemented by the initiation of force, is a flagrant violation of property rights, the very foundation of freedom and one's inalienable right to life. To withhold by coercion, i.e., the income tax, and steal the product of an individual's labor is clearly an initiation of force. This must not be violated by government policy. Property rights must never be subjected to a vote by its citizens. And yet, that is exactly what happened in 1913 when our duly elected congressman enacted an amendment to the Constitution. The income tax was an abomination then at a rate of 2 to 3% and continues to be now at up to 37%, a chilling example of the forces of tyranny which are ever at work. But this has been done by authoritarian governments throughout history, up to and including our present government. Government must be paid for services rendered through regulations that protect our lives and property. These are legitimate functions of government. It must now be made evident that the income tax was not included in our original Constitution because the statesmen at that time were very dedicated to the principles of liberty and freedom. A 3% tax on Wall Street transactions will suffice to eliminate the hated income tax. By removing this stress and onerous duty, it will aid and improve the health and happiness of all. So again, let capitalism work. Therefore, it must be affirmed that all taxes must be voluntary. The income tax must be phased out and abolished. Number 2, decriminalize victimless crimes, where the victim is also the perpetrator. Among these are prostitution, gambling, and drugs. These activities may be unsavory, dangerous, and even stupid, but you cannot outlaw stupidity. The ultimate answer is education, but in the meantime, we can regulate and tax just as we have done with gambling and alcohol. Prohibition did not work and instead resulted in unintended consequences of lawlessness, corruption of government officials, mobsters, murder, cartels, etc. These consequences we see today with the war on drugs. Have we learned nothing? The obscene overpopulation of our prisons is direct evidence of our failed policies, with mostly nonviolent citizens incarcerated. Since over half of all drugs are consumed by us, we are literally perpetrating this war. We must take the profit motive out if we are to make an impact on this problem. Again, educate, regulate, and tax. Tobacco, alcohol, and drugs will always be a health problem. But by decriminalizing the production and establishing regulations that ensure, as much as possible, the safety of these, it will minimize the dangers. This will also reduce the profits and criminal activities of foreign cartels. This will have a tremendous impact on the immigration problem, which has people south of our border literally fleeing for their lives. Jobs, prosperity, and happiness does not flourish in an environment of criminality, violence, and evil produced by the war on drugs. I have attempted to apply reasonable solutions to these problems with critical thinking. An example of non-critical thinking, when seeing these poor people fleeing for their lives coming across our borders, is, quote, "We'll just build a wall." This ill-conceived policy is not guided by the philosophy of reason, but the dominant philosophy of our day, pragmatism, where principles, truths, and rights are not necessary, and one need not be constrained by these moral concepts. Just the fastest, easiest path to solve problems is good enough. This sloppy thinking has led to most of our problems, whereby the ends justify the means. Number 3, term limits of all elected politicians. Term limits of all elected politicians, federal, up to and including the president, shall be 1 term only, and I mean 1 term. After the president has served 1 year, the president may thereafter continue to serve at the pleasure of the Congress. The president may be voted out of office at any time thereafter by the Congress. This will remind the president and congressmen that they are there to serve and protect the lives and properties of the citizens and the Constitution, not to build political empires or for financial gain. The same politicians are to have the same salaries as the average American worker. If they want a salary raise, then see to it that the American worker gets his or hers first. Number 4, universal health care and education. This is necessary for everyone to achieve their maximum potential and happiness. Again, Jefferson's pursuit of happiness. Since every section of our great country and even every state has different cultures, then allow each state the freedom and encouragement to lead the way to solve their own unique problems and finance them. Less involvement by the federal government, the better. The competitions by the states will work better when more enlightened ideas will be made available to all. To begin with, allow the teachers to teach and not be too constrained by edicts from the state. Number 5, gun control. All automatic and semi-automatic weapons should be recognized as military weapons. They belong with the military and should be turned in and stored in a local armory. The ownership of these weapons could and perhaps should remain with the owners, but kept out of the public domain. Citizens may have access to their weapons under supervision by the military and proper maintenance and use of the weapons in case of foreign invasion. Encouragement should be given to a stronger National Guard to sustain a well-established militia. The draft. In a state of liberty throughout history, free men have always been willing to fight for their freedom. A draft is not necessary. The Electoral College. Andrew Jackson made a strong case for abolishment of the Electoral College 160 years ago. Andrew Jackson is the father of the Democratic Party, and our strongest advocate of democracy. Without the Electoral College, everyone's vote counts. Therefore, the Electoral College should be abolished. In conclusion, how far we have strayed from our founding fathers, intellectuals, Jefferson and Franklin, men of courage and warriors, Adams, Washington, and Jackson, men of honor, Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. Now we have our current politicians with imbecile ideas of, well, we will just build a wall, the application of which has resulted in tearing families apart and even death to some and unhappiness to all. But what can we expect from a leadership who fulfills all the clinical criteria of a sociopathic personality? This idea of solving a problem, immigration, one might expect from a dictator and or a sociopath. A whim is not a universal truth. A whim worshiper is not a qualification for leadership. It's absolutely dangerous for a president of a nation. A more humane and empathetic solution is inscribed on our Statue of Liberty. Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Our very culture demands that we live up to these ideals. So let's do it.